This episode of the Dead Man Walking podcast is brought to you by Cast Magic. Cast Magic is the premier AI tool for repurposing your audio and video content, generating dozens of potential new engagement opportunities between you and your audience. Cast Magic saves me 4 to 5 hours of post-podcast production time every week. Check out what Cast Magic can do for you by clicking the link at the top of the description box. Now, onto the podcast.
Good.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead.fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what happened to me, and that's how I got the name Repeatedly Dead.fred. Today, I have the fascinating Cari Haim as our guest. You might know her as the older sister of the late child actor Cari Haim, and it's just a fascinating story that we're going to explore. So, Cari, thank you so much for coming on, and
thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I'm glad you're not dead.
Me too. So, has it been a while since you've done press, or are you still doing? Not that I'm press.
Sometimes I do a little bit here and there for stuff that I've done. I've done a bunch of interviews here and there about my brother, and I've done things about, a film that I've made, or little things here and there. But it has been a little while. I host my own podcast, so it's been a while since I've been a guest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's your podcast called?
My podcast is called Order Up, and it's a fun food podcast. And I have 3 lovely comedian co-hosts. And I can send you the link afterwards, and you can share it with all of your viewers. It's just a fun podcast. We talk about fun food questions like, is a hamburger a sandwich? Things like that.
Did you come to a definitive conclusion on that?
Yeah. So every sort of season, we interview 6 guests and talk about the question. Oh, I look kind of frozen there for a second. And yeah, a hamburger is a sandwich, I think. And then we have a bunch of other questions, and it's sort of a poll system. People have very strong opinions on these things, though.
That's not surprising. People have strong opinions on everything.
True.
So, as we were talking, for listeners and viewers, we often have a pre-chat before we start recording. And I asked Cari about her brother's Wikipedia page, which fascinated me because I'm like 900 years older than Cari. I wasn't really part of, that era when your brother was active.
Right. Yeah.
But I understand you were actually the first actor in the family.
Yeah. Yeah, I really loved that kind of thing. We had friends of the family who also did it, and it was kind of, I thought we'd want to try. So I really begged our parents to get an agent, and we do all this stuff. Didn't really know what we were doing, but we did it. And, we were extras in a few, like in The Littlest Hobo. I keep trying to find that episode, but can't find it. We did a few things like that. And then my brother got some work, like real work. His first, I think he got a little commercial, and then he did the Edison Twins, which is a classic Canadian kids show. And he wasn't one of the main kids. He was like the friend of one of the main kids. And he did a bunch of those episodes. And then he got an American film, and that's how things started. So they were looking for a child for a film that was going to film in New York, starring Terry Garr. It was called Firstborn. And they looked at a bunch of
star from the past.
Yeah, Terry Garr. We loved her, and we adored her. We knew who she was because she was in all those Mel Brooks movies, and we were huge fans of that. And he got cast in this movie, and it had really well-known producers, Stanley Jaffe and, oh my goodness, I can't remember her name right now, Cheryl. I want to say Lansing, but I don't think that's it. Anyway, from that film, he ended up getting a lot more work. So it kind of just snowballed, because that film, I don't think it did super well, but it got him noticed. And from then on, things just started spiraling, and he went into getting more and more and more work.
So did he just run off to California or wherever things were filming?
Kind of. Like at the beginning, it was the first film was in New York. So they were there for a couple of months, and I went for quite a while to hang out with them.
Mhm.
And then other films, he would go wherever the film was. But eventually, a few years later, maybe 1986 ish, like a couple of years out, my parents decided to move to California because they were traveling there all the time. So I think it just
Mhm.
became a sort of a necessity to be there. And at that time, I was 16. My brother was 14 when that move happened, and I decided I didn't want to stay in California. I decided I wanted to finish high school up here in Toronto. So that's
Mhm.
when I left home, was at 16, which was tricky. So my parents were supportive of the decision, and they supported me financially somewhat and everything, but it
Mhm.
that was when I decided, okay, I have to start making my own move here because I didn't
Mhm.
want to live there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how did you support yourself if your parents were only supporting you somewhat?
They were. I mean, I didn't have to pay for housing really because I lived with friends of the family or whatever. So for a couple
Mhm.
of years that was dealt with. My parents were sending me some money. I had a
Mhm.
job, a couple of jobs, like babysitting and working in a store and all
Oh,
these kinds of things. Um,
somebody in the
yeah.
Facebook group messaged me, or maybe she posted that you used to
Ooh.
babysit her.
Ooh, I will have to go and check that out.
Yeah.
Ooh, that would be fun to reconnect.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so and I worked like in a greeting card store and I did, other things
Mhm.
like that. But my parents were sending me money, but we didn't have to really worry about housing so much the
Mhm.
first maybe 2 years. And then, I'd rent an apartment or whatever. It was cheaper then too. Things were more reasonable back then, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not like now.
No, not like now. I'm talking sort of late 80s, early 90s. It was really cheap.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So, were you in the city proper, or were you like up in Thornhill or one of the
Mm,
other?
when I left home, I was more in the city proper, still
Mhm.
sort of outskirts, I would say more Willowdale area, but not in Thornhill
Mhm.
at that time. I did have times when I lived sort of midtown and
Mhm.
eventually went on to university at York here in Toronto. So yeah, I just lived in the city. I'm up in Thornhill now, but back then I was in the city.
Mhm. So, as your main career now,
Mhm.
you're working with the deaf,
I do.
and
Hmm.
as we mentioned before in our pre-talk, you know my friend Alana Sherman Hoffer,
I do.
and how did you become an advocate or so involved in working with the deaf?
So I've been thinking about that myself lately. I've been teaching for 26 years now. The past, let's say 20 of them have been as a specialist teacher of deaf and hard of hearing children. And I was always interested in sign language. I just thought it was cool to look at and to
Hmm.
see. And when I was in my 20s, I took some sign language classes just for fun. And then
Hmm.
eventually I became a teacher, just sort of a regular teacher. And I used to do a lot of theater as well. One of the shows I did, the actor who played my dad, who's now a very close friend of mine, he was a teacher of the deaf in the Catholic school board system. And I thought, ooh, that sounds really interesting. And I went to observe him as a teacher and thought, okay, this is cool. So then I went on and specialized, and I've been doing that sort of ever since. I
Hmm.
just thought it was fascinating. I just wanted to do something a little bit more specialized.
And has there been a student that you feel you've impacted, you know, that just changed their life around?
Oh my, change their life around. I think it's more the other way around that students,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure I know that I have impacted a lot of students and I'm lucky for that experience. I've had a bunch of students that have impacted me tremendously. I
Mhm.
had one student who, um, when I had her for grade 4, 5, and 6. So, 3 solid years, you get to know a kid really, really well. And in the midst of that time, she had cancer, a
Mhm.
recurrence of the cancer that she had when she was an infant. And often, infant or childhood cancers, the medications can often cause deafness. So that's how some kids
Mhm.
end up with hearing loss is they've had a cancer. So this child had a cancer while she was with me. So it became this really interesting way to talk to the other students in the class about her illness. She's fine now. She's like 18. I'm still in touch with her. Um,
Mhm.
but it's one of those kids that you just become super close to and you become close with the family, and the family was nice enough to let me visit her at the hospital and bring her school stuff, and it just becomes one of those kids that you become sort of related to.
Mhm.
because of the situation.
So, do you know, is most occurrences of deafness, is that mostly genetic, like you're born with it, or is a fair percentage of it acquired?
No, I think a lot of it's just genetic. Well, some of it's just unknown. We just don't know why. There are genetic factors that can come into play, and some people do get tested and then they find out, oh, we have this gene or that gene. Um,
Mhm.
there's also things like meningitis can cause deafness. I've had a number of students over the years who've had meningitis as little kids, and that
Mhm.
can lose your hearing. Cancer medication when you're little can cause it. There's a whole bunch of reasons, and sometimes it's genetic through families. Like I once had a few brothers through my class who all
Mhm.
were deaf. The parents were hearing, but the kids were deaf. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
So, speaking of genetics, you've had cancer yourself,
I have. Yeah,
as did your mother.
yes.
Uh,
And
Did
funnily
you have
enough,
the
we
same?
we did not. It's very
Okay.
weird. We both had breast cancer,
Okay.
but we had a different kind of breast cancer, and we've been tested for the gene. There's a special gene that you can be tested for, and we don't have that gene. So it was just one of these flukes. So my mom's cancer was about, I'm going to say 15 years ago now. Mine
Mhm.
was recent. Mine was just 2 years ago. It's almost 2 years since I've had my surgery, and I had chemo and radiation, like the whole 9 yards.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a weird thing. I'm still kind of recovering mentally from it, I think. I think physically
Sure.
I'm pretty okay. It's just a bizarre experience to have, to kind of, as you know, like from having almost died 20 times or having died 20 times, like
Yeah.
I wasn't close to death, but chemo kind of brings you to the brink of
Yeah.
yourself and the brink of feeling as bad as you're going to feel. And you start making decisions and you start
Mhm.
thinking about what you want to do differently and regrets and things. So
So,
it's been interesting.
yeah. So, is there anything that resulted from this? Like something you did change radically about your life?
Um,
That's a question I get all the time.
mhm,
Like, did you make all these promises to God that, you're not keeping anymore? And
right. I didn't really make any promises to anybody or to God or anything like that. I just feel like um if you want to do some, like I've had regrets, not horrible things, but just like, oh, I wish I had pursued my acting career more when I was younger. Like I did
Mhm.
it as a child and then stopped for a long, long, long time. And then I had kids later in life and so on. And now I'm like, oh, I wish I had continued earlier on. I
Mhm.
wish had done more comedy things earlier on. I'd
Mhm.
be farther ahead by now. But the point is, I'm just going to do it now. So I'm doing it now. Like I'm doing improv, I'm doing sketch writing, I'm gonna start some stand up soon. Like, and I'm thinking, is this ridiculous? There is this piece and there's this little voice in your head, something like, you're too old and it's ridiculous and don't do it now. You've missed the boat. But it's like, no, forget that. I'm doing it. Like
Mhm.
I'm doing it. No one, you don't need to ask permission for these. Like, I think also as you get older and you're like, I'm not waiting for approval for these things.
Right.
I'm just going to do it because, frankly, nobody else cares. Like, when you're younger, I think you think a lot about, oh my God, how's this person looking at me? And how's that person looking at me? And how are people perceiving me? And as you get older, you start to realize actually no one's really thinking about you at all. They're only thinking
Mhm.
about themselves. So it's hard to get over that because you still sometimes feel like, oh, I'll look stupid if I do this or that. But ultimately, you just got to do what makes you happy.
Mhm.
So, and take little risks here and there. So that's what I'm doing this year and for the past couple of years.
So, do you still have contacts from your showbiz, life, your previous showbiz life,
So my brother's previous show was like American
or whoever?
or just, well, I have some friends here in the Canadian world.
Mhm.
And I'm making more connections as I go along.
Mhm.
There are some friends from films that my brother did in the past. Some people I'm still in touch with here and there, not too many, but
Mhm.
it is nice to kind of think back and look back at the past because we all kind of grew up together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, are those actors that you would keep in touch with?
So I'll drop a few names.
Oh,
Shall I drop some names? Um,
sure.
So I'm friendly with Scott Schwartz, who, if you
Okay.
know him, he's done a lot of things, but he's most famous for being in the movie The Christmas Story.
Okay.
And he's the little boy who got his tongue stuck to the pole. He licked the
Classic.
pole, and da da da.
Yeah.
So it's a classic. He and my brother were very, very close, and he became
Hmm.
close with my mom as well. He was a guest on my podcast. He's a lovely guy. So that's Scott. I'm in touch periodically with Scott Grimes, who is on American Dad. He's in Ted. He was in Oppenheimer. He does a lot of stuff. He used to be on ER way, 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 way back in the day.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's a
Wasn't
really
he on that Star Trek knock?
yes, 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 yes. The
Yeah,
Orville, the Orville.
the Orville. Yeah.
Yes. So really good actor, and he's a really lovely guy. And we knew each other as kids, right? So
Hmm.
I'm in touch with him and his family. I'm in touch with.
Hmm.
Um, and I've recently been chatting with Nicole Eggert. Do
Oh,
you remember her? Yeah. So
well, I remember her
Nicole,
bathing suit.
yes. So Nicole is a lovely woman, and she also has a podcast. I can't recall the title right now, but if I recall it as we go along, she hosts a podcast as well. She and my brother were engaged at one point, a
Oh,
long, long time
okay.
ago, and she's also going through her own struggle with breast cancer right now, which
Okay.
she's been public about, so I feel okay saying it. And so
Hmm.
we've been chatting about that because I'm so recently out of it. So,
Hmm.
I've been just sharing my experiences with her, trying to say, okay, these are things I did that helped me when I was in chemo, for example. And like, you
Hmm.
get all these side effects. And I was just giving her some
Right.
tips and tricks on how to survive it. And she'll
Hmm.
survive it. She'll be great. Yeah.
So, how is your mom doing after her battle?
So my mom is doing quite well. She has not had any recurrence or anything like that. You get little medical things happen as you age, and
Hmm.
she gets little medical things here and there, but she's very, like, she lives independently and she runs around, and she goes out for lunch with her friends and whatever. She's doing her own thing, and she's doing really, really well.
Did her and your dad stay in California or?
No, well, yes and no. So my parents eventually separated and split up many, many, many years
Okay.
ago. My dad is now back in Montreal. I have a
Okay.
half brother named Daniel, who is about 20 years younger than me.
Hmm.
Um, and my mom was in California with Corey for quite a long time. And when Corey passed away, she came back up here to Toronto. Yeah.
Okay. So she
Yeah.
was going through her cancer when Corey passed? Is that like
She
the sort of timing
was,
of it?
it was close. It was, yeah,
Yeah.
she had just finished most of it. I think
Wow.
afterwards she still had to do a few treatments after everything happened after he passed away. She still had to do a few treatments, but not
Talk
chemo
about
per
getting
se.
hammered.
Yeah, too much all at once. It
Yeah.
was too much. And but thank goodness she's well now. Yeah.
So one of the things I wondered about is how Corey's life affected you. Like, were you
Hmm.
somewhat insulated from what was going on in his struggles?
It's an interesting question. So because my parents moved to California and I left, we didn't really live together full time
Hmm.
after the ages of 14 and 16. But of course, I would go back very often to visit and be with them, and he would come
Hmm.
here. But my brother, so just to be clear, my brother died of pneumonia, and he had an
Right.
enlarged heart. And so he did have a drug problem back in the day. There's like no denying that. For many, many, many years, he was on and off,
Hmm.
and he had a lot of substance abuse issues. There is like, and because of that, a lot of people think he died of an overdose, which he didn't. Not that there's
Hmm.
shame in dying of an overdose, but I just want to be clear about that, that at the time he died, he was actually doing fairly well, all things considered. But for many years, he did have substance abuse issues. And so, of course, that affected me because it affected my parents and my mom, and,
Hmm.
him trying to get him help. And, people with addiction issues, it's very hard to help them unless they
Yeah.
really, really want to be helped. And he wanted to be helped, but he didn't want to be helped. And it was really, it's such a difficult, difficult thing. So eventually I had to make like a lot of serious sort of boundaries about
Mhm.
our relationship. So we had periods of time where we didn't talk, and then periods
Mhm.
of time when we did talk. But at the time he died, we were on speaking terms, and it was all good. He knew I was pregnant at the time that he passed away. He knew that I was pregnant, and he was very happy about that. So that was lovely. Like, I'm glad he found out about that. But I had like some little rules about my brother. Like, he was always welcome to come to my house and be with us and have dinner with us and whatever. But I didn't want to go out to restaurants with him anymore, because even though he'd probably have been fine the past 2 years, years prior, he would have drank too much or whatever. And I just said, you know what?
Yeah.
I can't control your behavior, but I can control my behavior. And my
Mhm.
behavior will be, I can't do it anymore. So, my dad would say, let's go for breakfast or whatever. And I'd be like, no, you could go with him or you could go with me, or you could just all come here and we'll all be together. And that's what we would do. So,
That
yeah.
takes a lot of strength and resilience on your part to set up that boundary.
I think it was years of, you get kicked in the teeth a lot of times and it's like, oh my gosh, this is
Mhm.
happening again. And then you feel bad. And then he would apologize. I'm like, well, you don't need to apologize because you're doing whatever you're doing for your own life. And, I didn't
Mhm.
agree with his choices. But I mean, I know other people now who are dealing with addiction, and it's so difficult. It's
Mhm.
so difficult. And I think for a long time, I was a lot more judgmental about the whole addiction piece, going like, well, why can't you just get over it?
Right.
Like, right, not understanding the depth of it maybe, and how hard it really is to
Mhm.
get well, and how few people actually get well. Like, it's really challenging.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think if you just look around at society in general, our eating patterns. I'm definitely not svelte. I'm a lot smaller than I used to be, but with all the processed food and
Yeah.
the sugars and everything in our lives, it's really hard just to kick that.
Yep. It is. It's hard to kick anything, right? And then when you
Mhm.
get something that's like so physiologically, never mind psychologically, which is already the problem, but when it's physiologically addicting, it's so difficult. So my brother did a lot of rehabs, and he really tried. And he actually was doing really well at the time that he
Mhm.
died, but he got sick. And I assume that many years of damage to your body, like, pneumonia can be deadly, which is why they tell older people, get your pneumonia vaccine. Like, people die
Mhm.
from pneumonia, which he did.
Yeah.
Once your lungs fill with fluid, it's very hard to recover.
Yeah. I'm guessing he had no idea he had an enlarged heart.
No, he did not. We didn't know. There are cardiac issues in my family. So actually, we now, we have an autopsy report that shows that he had this really enlarged heart, which we know
Mhm.
now is genetic, and we'll probably
Mhm.
end up testing my kids and, um, eventually down the road. But yeah, no, we didn't know that. Mhm.
Mhm. I think when you're going through as much trauma as he did,
Mhm.
um, you know, if it's not right in front of the doctor,
Yeah,
they're just not going to explore for things like that, which
right.
is kind of what happened in my condition. Um, they what happened to me usually happens to men in their 70s.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they weren't looking for it. They were trying to prove other things.
Right. See, yeah, like sometimes when something's you're right. Like sometimes things just get missed because they go by statistics too, right?
Mhm.
Like, this is probably not. So yeah, I don't think he was ever investigated for cardiac issues.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I asked people online if they had any questions for you.
Okay.
So one of the questions I thought would be an obvious yes, but it's, do you have any regrets about what's gone on in your life? Which is, I would say everybody has
Yeah,
some.
I guess yes and no. Like what I said earlier, oh, I wish I had done this when I was younger and that when I was younger. I don't know if
Mhm.
that's really regret, per
Mhm.
se, because when you're in the moment, you make the best decisions that you can make at the time, right? So,
Mhm.
um, like for example, I'm married to like the most amazing man right now. He's lovely,
Mhm.
but I was married once before in my 20s to my high school boyfriend, and we
Okay.
eventually got divorced, and that's fine. But I don't regret that marriage. I
Mhm.
don't think it was a mistake, because at the time it was the right
Mhm.
decision to make. And things change as you go along, right? So I just feel like I don't have real regrets. I don't feel
Mhm.
like, traumatized by regret. I wish I didn't sit around and, as much as I do, I just wish I'd
Mhm.
be a little more active and go, I want to do this, I want to do that. Let's just go do it instead of thinking about it. But
Mhm.
that's more of a personality flaw than a regret.
Wow, that's hilarious. So you said you're going to do some stand up. Have you got your 5 minutes
I
written
have
or?
not. I have like 2 minutes. I'm
Okay.
trying to write 3 to 5 minutes. I don't have it yet.
Hmm.
But I need to do it like within the next. I'm finishing a sketch writing class right now.
Okay.
It's over the next on the weekend, and then within the next 2 weeks, I'm gonna try to get to a stand up an open mic night, because I just need to try it. I need to do it. I'm an
Hmm.
actor as well, and right now it's very, very quiet for actors, and I've had like one audition since 2024 started. And I feel very passive just sitting here kind of waiting for these auditions to
Hmm.
come. So that's why I'm doing some writing and some other things, and I'm going to try the stand up thing and give it a whirl.
Hmm.
Have you ever done it?
Well, I was a professor, so that's kind of like doing stand up.
That must have been
You know,
quite a class. Yeah.
yeah. And I've done a number of improv classes, and um, so are you taking your sketch class through Second City, or where else
I'm
can you
doing
take?
the sketch writing through Comedy Bar Pro, their Comedy Bar Pro series. Comedy Bar just started a bunch of classes, which are
Okay,
fantastic.
that's the
I
place on
did,
Danforth.
yeah, this is the one,
Okay.
Danforth East. Yeah, it's really great. I took all of my improv classes through Bad Dog Theater on Spadina. Um, so I did a bunch of foundations courses there, and that was super fun.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff happening in Toronto right now, and so
Hmm.
much opportunity and I feel like we don't laugh enough, and like I just need more humor, and yeah. So I'm just going to places where I can do that.
Yeah, this came up on my last podcast interview that in the state that the world's in right now, it's um it's the comedians and the songwriters who are gonna,
Yeah.
hopefully pull us out.
Yeah, it's funny because during the pandemic I wrote a film and produced this film. It's a mockumentary, and it's about
Hmm.
a mom like me who dreams of winning a gold medal in competitive napping, because I like to nap. So we
Yeah.
made the film, and it did pretty well in festivals, and it's now streaming on something called the Real Women's Network if people want to rent it. It's called Demonstration Sport. And I submitted it to the Canadian Screen Awards a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And it's fine that my film per se didn't get chosen or shortlisted. It's all
Hmm.
like you have to know people who are voting members, whatever.
Right.
But not one comedy short was in the running for all the five films. And I was like, why is everything so heavy? Why does it
Yeah.
all have to be so depressing? Like, you're telling me that in all of Canada, there was not one comedy short that was eligible or good enough to be. I'm sure there were tons. Doesn't have to
Hmm.
be mine. I just wanted one comedy film. And a lot of films and TV shows now are all very dark and dramatic and deep, and I
Hmm.
just can't. I just can't. Life is just too much right now, and I just want things to make me laugh.
I agree with you. And
Yeah.
my book, sort of little humble brag, I was nominated for some awards, and I went to this one show in particular,
Hmm.
and almost all the books that won were either people who were professional writers, like they had newspaper gigs or stuff
Hmm.
like that, or they were academics. And like maybe, you know, over the next 30 years, 10 PhD students might read their book. I don't even think they read my book.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, did anyone watch my film? I don't know. Or any of these comedies. Like, there's
Mhm.
comedies, there's fun stuff out there, and there's really good filmmakers making them. And there has to be room for them. Not everything needs to be deep and dramatic. Some things are okay if it's just funny. You know,
Mhm.
like a lot of times as a writer, people are like, why are you the one to tell this story? And why are you the one to tell the story right now? I'm like, because it's freaking funny. Like, why does it need to be a deep answer about my history and my past? It's funny. I want to make you
Mhm.
laugh. Like, that's the answer. That's enough. I don't know.
So, are there things like Canadian Comedy Awards or
Yeah,
yeah?
there are. I'm just not involved in that world enough because I didn't do it as a young person. So I'm trying to get in now. Like there's this right now or in the next week, the Toronto Sketch Fest is starting. It's like a big sketch
Mhm.
comedy thing. There's films, there's live performances. There are the Canadian Comedy Awards. I think the Comedy Hall of Fame is just inducting a bunch of people right now. Like I'm just late to this world. So I'm trying to
Sure.
figure out my way into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might have a contact for you. You might have
Oh,
him already, but
you never know.
we'll, we'll talk
We'll
after.
talk.
Yeah. So everything seems to be going on course for you now.
Mhm.
Um,
Pretty much. I mean, you know what? Life, I'm learning that life, that whole thing about overcoming adversity and whatever, like, it's like a roller coaster, right? Like, there are times of life that are just going really, really well and everything's amazing. And then it sucks for like a long time. And it's so hard to remember when you're in that low that it will eventually go back up because
yeah,
it does do that throughout your lifetime, I think. But it's so hard when you're down to to remember about it will change. And I don't know
yeah.
how to change that. Yeah.
There's that old Yiddishism that man plans and God laughs.
Yep.
You know,
Yep. It's very true, right? Like I didn't plan on having breast cancer and like losing a year or doing something different for that year, a year of my life between surgery
Mhm.
and radiation and chemo, and couldn't work for like the longest time and was in bed, and it just that's not how I planned to spend that year.
Mhm.
Um, but who does? And then now I'm well, so I'm really lucky that it went that way.
Yeah. Are there
Yeah.
any hilarity moments that you've been able to drag out of that scenario?
Oh gosh, yeah. Um, so I had a double mastectomy with immediate reconstruction, meaning they do everything right away. But I was kind of afraid to look at myself after they removed the bandages and everything because, it's new and it's scary and whatever. We
Mhm.
were at the hospital and I was lying down because my plastic surgeon was coming to check the stitches and things like this. And I said to my husband, "It's okay if you look." And he looked. I was lying down. And we left. And I said, "So how did everything look?" Because, I still didn't pay attention. And he said, "Well, let's just say that you were lying down and they were not."
Yeah.
And there were funny moments. Losing your hair is a trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you can relate to me because I used to have really really long hair, and I started to think about how much time and money and effort we put into all the various products and things for this weird stuff that grows out of the top of your head. Like it just makes you think
Mhm.
about how weird it all is. Like this weird straw like stuff is coming out of my head, and I'm spending hundreds of dollars to have people like design it in different ways and style it and color it. It's like a big art project on your head, and then you lose your art project, and then you're like, oh, this is so much easier.
I think you just wrote 30 seconds of stand-up.
Maybe I did.
Yeah,
Maybe I need to talk to you more, and then I'll get my 5 minutes done. There we go.
sure. Happy to. So, do you feel you've forged your own identity through everything your family's been through? Like, or does everybody just ask you about, your brother and everything?
Um, People do ask about my brother, especially depending on the age of the person.
Mhm.
So there's like our age, like people who knew him back in the day. Then there's a big gap of people who don't know, but there's a lot of younger people who are now starting to know who he is, which is very interesting. So I get like
Mhm.
messages on social media and stuff, like people who are discovering his films. I never mind when someone asks me kind questions,
Yeah.
genuine questions, not kind of smutty questions. So I'm always happy to chat about things like that. I do sort of feel like I forged my own identity, partly by leaving home so early, partly
Mhm.
by trying to always live like I do find a lot of things really funny. And I do try to, we laugh a lot in our house. And like, that's how I want to live. And I'm quite deliberate about it. So I don't
Mhm.
want to like laugh at things that are serious and horrible, but
Yeah,
for me,
sometimes you have to.
the only way to get through it is laughing about stuff. And
Mhm.
yeah, that just works for me.
Cool. Um, I guess I should have mentioned this. We were introduced by Miles Shane, and
Yes.
I'm not quite clear how you know each other. Maybe
So
from the neighborhood.
no, we know each other because his wife's brother, uh,
Mhm.
their family and I and our family became friendly. So, and one year they were all in town and we invited them over for New Year's Eve one night. They came over. So I didn't know him before, but I knew him through his brother-in-law. Yeah.
Okay. So you all got drunk and
Well, the kids were there. It wasn't that exciting.
oh yeah, yeah, forgot about that.
Yeah, the
Okay.
spawn, as we call them. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we are almost out of time. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
No, I just think let's just all try to make more things humorous and funny and try to remember the low will eventually rise. That's what I would leave it with.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
So, to all of you tuning in, thank you for tuning in to the Dead Man Walking podcast. Cari, thank you so much. This has been
This
delightful.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. It was lovely to meet you.
You too. So please like, subscribe, do all the things that the influencers tell you to do on the more popular podcasts, and we'll see you next episode. Bye bye.